Welcome to another deep dive. This time, we're going to be tackling some pretty big
Oh,
questions
yeah?
about language and meaning,
Oh,
and
yeah.
maybe even reality itself.
That was good.
We've got sources here on three really incredible thinkers: Martin Heidegger,
Mm-hmm.
Ludwig Wittgenstein, and Nāgārjuna, all of whom grappled with
Yeah.
kind of the limits of what we can express and really even know.
Right.
Are you ready to have our minds stretched a little bit?
Absolutely.
Well-
And you know what I find so fascinating about all this is that these figures coming from such different backgrounds, you've got existentialism, philosophy of language, and Buddhism.
Hmm.
They all kind of end up circling around these fundamental questions.
Hmm.
It really makes you wonder if there's something inherent to the human experience that pushes us to these boundaries of thought.
Okay, so let's start with Heidegger.
Sure.
I keep seeing this word being with a capital B everywhere in this material.
Okay.
What's that all about?
Well, Heidegger was really obsessed with being as this fundamental ground of existence,
Mhm.
the underlying reality from which everything emerges. But he realized that our everyday language
Mhm.
focused on specific beings, the tables and chairs and smartphones and all that, actually traps us in a certain way of thinking.
Trapped. How so?
Well, he argues that we define things by what they are not. So think about how you describe a cat to someone who's never seen one. You probably say something like, well, it's like a small dog, but it purrs instead of barks and it climbs trees.
Hmm.
We understand things in relation to other things through this web of negations.
So we're constantly defining things by what they aren't rather than like directly grasping what they are.
Right.
Hmm. That's a pretty thought-provoking idea.
Exactly. And this creates what Heidegger calls inframing.
And framing.
It's like, imagine you're wearing a pair of glasses that you can't take off. And those glasses represent our conceptual frameworks, the ways we've been taught to see and understand the world.
Mhm.
And they shape our perceptions and limit what we can even perceive in the first place.
So we're stuck in this box, shaped by our language and our culture, and we don't even realize it.
Right.
Okay, that's a bit unsettling. Is there any way to break out of this in framing?
Well, Heidegger suggests that intense experiences, particularly anxiety,
Mm.
not just the everyday worries, but like a deep existential dread,
Oh.
can shake us out of our usual way of seeing things.
Okay.
He says anxiety throws us into the face of nothingness, giving us a glimpse of something beyond our conceptual grasp.
So it's like a glitch in the matrix, a moment where we see reality without those conceptual glasses. I can see how that would be both terrifying and liberating.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And to kind of help visualize this, we actually have a diagram from the source material.
Okay.
It shows two circles,
Yeah.
one representing being, that pure ground of existence,
Hmm.
and another representing our limited concept of being shaped by language and in framing.
Okay.
It really drives home the point that our understanding of reality is always filtered through our own conceptual lenses.
Okay, so Heidegger has given us a lot to chew on here. But before we move on, I want to touch on something that feels relevant to me
Sure.
and maybe to our listeners as well. If we're so inframed by our concepts, does that mean we can never truly understand other people? After all, they have their own sets of glasses they're looking through.
That's a fantastic question, and it leads us perfectly to our next thinker, Ludwig Wittgenstein.
Okay.
He was fascinated by the nuances of language and how meaning works, and he really moved away from this idea that language simply mirrors reality
Mm.
and offered a much more complex perspective.
Okay, so what did Wittgenstein propose instead?
Well, he argued that meaning has these two distinct aspects to it. Representation,
Okay.
which is the mental picture we have of something,
Mhm.
and practice, which is how we actually use that concept in action.
Gotcha. Could you give me an example? I'm a big fan of concrete examples.
Sure. Think about the word missing someone.
Yeah.
You might have a strong mental image of that person, maybe feel a wave of longing, but at the same time, you might choose not to be with them
Right.
if given the chance.
Right.
So your internal representation of missing someone might be very different from how you actually act on it.
That's a really interesting example. So even simple words like missing can have these two layers of meaning, and they don't always perfectly align.
Right.
It makes you wonder how much we're misunderstanding each other all the time.
Exactly. And that brings us to a crucial point. We can never truly know another person's inner representations.
Mhm.
We only see their actions, their words, the tip of the iceberg.
So it's like we're all these little islands of consciousness separated by this gulf of subjectivity.
In a way, yeah. And if we connect this back to Heidegger, we see a parallel limitation.
Mm.
Just as we're inframed by our concepts, our understanding of others is limited by this observable, practical side of meaning.
Mm-hmm.
It's like trying to understand a book by only looking at its cover.
Wow. So both Heidegger and Wittgenstein have shown us how limited our understanding of reality and each other can be. This is starting to feel a bit heavy, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
Is there any way out of this conceptual maze?
Hmm.
I'm really hoping that our next thinker, Nāgārjuna, can shed some light on all of this.
Yeah.
Should we take a break and then dive into his ideas when we come back?
Yeah, let's do it. He just might offer a different perspective that could shift our whole understanding of meaning and reality.
All right, sounds good. Okay, so we're back and ready to dive into Nāgārjuna. I have to admit, the idea that we're all trapped in our own little thought bubbles is a little unnerving.
Yeah.
Can Nāgārjuna offer us any hope here?
Well, he just might. Nāgārjuna was a Buddhist philosopher who developed this really radical concept of emptiness.
Okay.
And it might be just the antidote we need to those limitations that Heidegger and Wittgenstein laid out for us.
Emptiness sounds a bit intimidating, I gotta say.
Sure.
Does that mean he thought nothing really exists?
Not quite. Nāgārjuna starts by acknowledging what he calls conventional reality, the everyday world that we all experience with cause and effect, where things seem to have this solid, independent existence. And it's actually a lot like what Heidegger called relational reality.
Right, so we're talking trees and squirrels and coffee mugs and all that.
Exactly. But here's where things get interesting. Nāgārjuna argues that this conventional reality is ultimately empty.
Okay.
Now, not empty in the sense of being non-existent, but empty of inherent existence.
Okay, I'm going to need you to break that down for me a bit. What does it mean for something to be empty of inherent existence?
All right, think about it this way. A tree is only a tree.
Okay.
Because it's not a rock, a cloud, or a podcast microphone.
Right.
You know, its identity depends on these distinctions, these relationships with other things.
So far, that sounds a lot like Heidegger's idea of negation, defining things by what they are not.
You're absolutely right. There's a definite connection there.
Okay.
But Nāgārjuna takes it a step further. He says that because things depend on each other for their identity, they can't have any essence or identity that's truly their own. They're empty of that inherent independent self.
So it's like the tree isn't really a tree in and of itself.
Right.
It's just a temporary collection of relationships that we label tree because it's convenient.
Exactly. And I know this can all sound a bit nihilistic, like it's saying that nothing really matters, but that wasn't Nāgārjuna's point at all.
Okay, good. Because I was starting to feel a little lost there.
Yeah.
So if everything is empty, where do we go from here? What's the point of anything?
This is where Nāgārjuna gets really interesting. Unlike Heidegger, who kind of leaves us stuck in this inframed world, Nāgārjuna offers a path forward.
Okay.
He believes that we can move beyond this limited conventional reality and access what he calls ultimate reality. And the key to that path is the Buddhist Eightfold Path.
Okay, so this is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. It's not just about understanding emptiness intellectually, but actually putting it into practice.
You got it. And this is where I think Wittgenstein's idea of the duality of meaning can come in handy. Remember how we talked about how he said meaning has both this representational side, you know, the mental image, and this practical side, how we use a concept in action.
Right, like the missing someone example.
Exactly. So Nāgārjuna seems to be saying that even though we can never fully grasp that ultimate reality with our limited concepts, we can still live in a way that aligns with it.
So even though we're stuck in this inframed world of language and concepts, like Heidegger was pointing out, there's still a way to connect with something deeper, something beyond our limited understanding.
Yeah. I'm starting to see how these three thinkers are weaving together here.
You're getting it. It's about recognizing the limitations of language.
Like Wittgenstein was showing us, while also accepting that there's something more, even if we can't fully grasp it with words. And that's where Nāgārjuna's Eightfold Path comes in. It's a way to live in accordance with this deeper reality.
I'm thinking about that diagram we have here from the source material, figure 3. It combines elements from both Heidegger and Wittgenstein's frameworks to represent Nāgārjuna's ideas. Could you maybe walk us through it a bit?
Absolutely. So in that diagram, A1 represents ultimate reality,
Okay.
that ineffable truth that lies beyond our concepts. Kind of like Heidegger's being,
Okay.
but maybe even bigger than that.
Okay, and then A2 is our conventional reality, right?
Yeah.
The world of trees and coffee mugs and such.
Exactly. And then B represents our attempts to capture that ultimate reality with language and concepts,
Right.
Attempts that are, of course, always limited by our inframing.
Okay, and then C is the eightfold path, the practical aspect of aligning ourselves with that ultimate reality, even though we can never perfectly grasp it.
Exactly. And you'll notice how the arrow from C goes straight to A1, bypassing the limitations of B.
Right.
This suggests that practice, not just intellectual understanding, can lead us to a deeper experience of reality.
This is incredible. So it's not about having all the answers,
Mm-hmm.
but about recognizing the limitations of our thinking and finding ways to act meaningfully despite those limitations. That's actually very empowering.
I think so too. Nāgārjuna is offering us this middle way, a path between feeling trapped by our limited understanding
Yeah.
and clinging to the illusion that we can ever fully grasp reality with concepts alone.
This has been quite a mind-bending journey so far. We've explored how our thinking is limited, how
Yeah.
meaning is slippery, and how reality might be empty in a way that we never imagined.
Absolutely.
But I'm curious what all of this means for our everyday lives. How does understanding these ideas actually change how we live and interact with the world?
Yeah, that's the key question, isn't it? And that's exactly what we'll explore in part 3 when we look at the practical implications of these ideas for our relationships, our ethics, and even our sense of self.
All right, so we're back and ready to really get into how all of this heady stuff we've been talking about actually plays out in our lives.
Right.
I mean, we've talked about how our thinking is inframed and how meaning is slippery and how reality might be empty.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a lot.
Yeah.
So how do we actually live with these ideas?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think if we take Nāgārjuna's idea of emptiness seriously, it really challenges our assumptions about a lot of things.
Like what?
Our relationships, our ethics, our sense of self, the whole 9 yards.
Okay, so let's start with relationships then.
Sure.
If our sense of self is empty, as Nāgārjuna suggests, does that mean that the boundaries between ourselves and others start to, dissolve? Do we all just melt into one big blob of consciousness?
I don't think that's quite it.
Okay.
It's not about losing our individuality.
Right.
It's more about recognizing that our sense of self is interconnected with everything around us. It's like that old saying, no man is an island. We are who we are because of our relationships with others, our experiences, our culture. It's all intertwined.
So it's less about erasing those boundaries and more about maybe understanding that those boundaries are a lot more porous than we might think.
Yeah, and I think this can have a huge impact on how we relate to other people. It cultivates empathy and compassion because we understand that their well-being is ultimately tied to our own. We're all part of this big web of relationships, and our actions have these ripple effects throughout the whole thing.
I can definitely see how that shift in perspective would lead to more kindness and understanding in our interactions with others. It's like recognizing that we're all in this together, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so what about ethics then? If nothing has inherent value, how do we even decide what's right and wrong?
Right. Well, it's not that actions don't matter. In fact, the Eightfold Path, remember, really emphasizes ethical conduct. But it frames ethics in terms of cultivating wisdom and compassion.
Okay.
It's less about following a rigid set of rules and more about acting in a way that creates harmony and understanding, recognizing that interconnectedness of everything.
So instead of thinking about, is this action inherently good or bad, it's more like, what impact will this action have on myself and others? Will it contribute to greater harmony or disharmony?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's a more nuanced and contextual way of approaching ethics.
Yeah.
And, I actually think this resonates with how many of us already live our lives. We make decisions based on the specific situation and our understanding of the potential consequences, rather than some abstract moral code.
It feels a lot more grounded somehow, a lot less abstract than trying to figure out some kind of universal moral code.
Exactly.
So this brings us to maybe the biggest question of all, right? If everything is empty, what about meaning and purpose in life? Does it all just become pointless?
I understand why people would worry about that, but that's not what Nāgārjuna is saying. He's not saying life is meaningless. He's suggesting that meaning isn't something that we find by clinging to these fixed ideas or identities or external achievements. It's found in the process of living itself, in cultivating wisdom and compassion and connection.
So it's not about the destination, but the journey, huh?
Right.
I'm thinking about that example from earlier, the meditating monk. He might not be able to put into words what he experiences during meditation, but that doesn't mean his practice is meaningless, right? It's the practice itself, the continual striving for understanding and connection that gives his life meaning.
That's a really beautiful way to put it. And remember, Nāgārjuna offers that Eightfold Path as a very practical guide for this journey. It's not about reaching some ultimate state of enlightenment, but it's about engaging in this process of continuous learning and growth and ethical action.
So instead of looking for meaning out there somewhere in the world, we cultivate meaning from within, through our actions and how we engage with the world around us.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that meaning isn't something fixed or inherent, but something that we actively create through the choices we make and our way of being in the world.
Wow, this has been quite a journey. We started out talking about the limitations of language, and we ended up exploring the nature of reality, ethics, relationships, and even the meaning of life itself. It's been mind-blowing, to be honest
But
with you.
I know it's amazing how these seemingly abstract philosophical ideas can lead to such profound insights about, just how to live.
Totally. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one question we want to leave our listeners with?
Well, if conventional reality is empty, like Nāgārjuna suggests, what does that mean for how you choose to live your life?
Hmm.
How might embracing this idea of emptiness lead to greater freedom and compassion and meaning in your own experience? We really encourage you to sit with this question and see where it takes you.
That's a fantastic note to end on. We really hope this deep dive has given you some food for thought, and we encourage you to keep exploring these ideas, keep questioning your assumptions, and keep searching for that deeper meaning that lies beyond language and concepts. Until next time, keep diving deep.